Hello and good evening. Welcome to the Sociology Staffroom. I'm Katie Tyler, and we've got Miss A talking to us about career changes. So, obviously, you are a sociology teacher and a law teacher, so fully experienced here in sort of your wealth. But I also want to say, so we had you on a previous podcast, and I really wanted to get you back on about career changes. I obviously know what career you changed from to, but some of our listeners might not know that. So, do you mind just sort of reminding us, first of all, what career you changed from, and obviously you're now obviously a sociology and law teacher, but what was your career beforehand?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was in corporate law for about 6 years after my degree, which was also in law. And I changed into a secondary school teacher for A level sociology and law. And I also teach a little bit of core citizenship for years 7 through to 11. So that's great.
Yes, a great wealth of experience there. So you're teaching both across all three key stages there, or two key stages. Um, so you've got a sort of a wealth of knowledge there. With regards to sort of your career, what made you make that switch? I know without sort of delving too much into it, but obviously had a sort of established career within law, as you said, corporate law. What sort of gave you that, sort of shift up? Because obviously coming from what is a private sector into public sector, what made you sort of think, do you know what? I'm up for this. I'm up for this sort of new challenge.
Yeah, so I think it kind of really starts from when I was in secondary school myself. Is I am the walking, talking cliche when I say, I really enjoyed school. I was quite studious. I worked hard, and I had an amazing sociology teacher who, at the time, I don't think he quite realized the impact he was having on a lot of us in our class. But for me particularly, he massively opened my eyes to society and, what society's like, what the status quo is like at the moment, and or what it was back then. And, he really just enlightened me to thinking critically. And I took sociology A level and GCSE myself. So that really became one of my favorite subjects that I'd taken for my A levels, and just a favorite subject that I pretty much covered in school. So, long story short, I then went into corporate law and went down the path that I had originally planned to do. And then I think after about 6 years, I thought, I'm not finding this as rewarding as I wanted it to anymore. It is really exciting and it's fast paced and it's challenging and it's difficult work. But I was often working, with high net worth individuals or businesses and companies, and I just thought this doesn't feed my soul anymore. And I always had teaching as like a plan. I don't know, the plan C, I guess, or plan B. And I always thought about my teacher, who then later on became more of a like, academic mentor for me. So I always thought back to that and thought about how I'd really like to do the same sort of thing for young people that I experienced when I was in school.
Wow, it's really inspiring actually. Because there's a couple of things you said there. Like obviously, one I can sense that your passion for teaching, and obviously you said like it feeds the soul. But what's interesting as well is that they pick up on that bit of the impact that a teacher may or may not have. But we don't necessarily know that as teachers. As where students kind of go each year. And we sort of you meet a range of students, and sometimes students think to themselves, do you know what? At year 7, I want to go into law, or I want to be a doctor, whatever that might be, or career path. And often sociology isn't something that's on their radar as such. When you think about careers interviews, and then you sort of take it. You're like, I really enjoyed that. I mean, I was a student a long, long time ago, but exactly the same. I took chemistry, biology, English, or something else, and then I just took sociology as just a what if. And actually ended up being my favourite subject. But there was that sort of tension, isn't there, in your head where you're thinking, this is what I thought I wanted to do, and this is what I love doing. And so it's really interesting to hear that perspective from one, a teacher, but also as an ex-student. So with this career change, obviously massively different, I think. I know I'm making assumptions here,
Yeah.
different environments. What skills, I suppose there's two questions I want to ask. The first one is, how do the skills that you had within the corporate world transfer? And then I suppose the second part to that question, what are the challenges in those two environments? So let's deal with sort of the transition first.
Yeah.
What skills have you managed to sort of bring across from the corporate world into what is in some ways completely opposite, I assume, from the corporate world, or maybe not. I don't know.
It's funny because people assume that they're two completely, polar opposite things. But in many ways, I actually found that my skills were massively transferable from law. So, in law, you're having to problem solve all the time, and you come across different clients on a daily basis where you're having to think critically, and you're having to, come across a lot of challenges. But in the same way, in school, you also come across problem solving in your classroom, or you're walking down the corridor and something happens and you have to suddenly deal with that. Or you have to speak to a parent, or you have to speak to another member of staff, and that's, an individual problem that you're solving. And I think my critical thinking skills and to some degree my problem solving has helped me with my subject area as well, which, sociology is very much about critical thinking, about what's around you and why people are behaving in a certain way and what drives human behavior. So those critical thinking skills really helped me with that. Honestly, I would say that general, skills like organization, professionalism, being able to work in a team, and really working in a fast-paced environment to strict deadlines has massively helped me with just transitioning really quickly into the educational environment in general. And I have said to quite a few people, in corporate law or in any kind of law, you will deal with difficult people and you will have heated situations, on a daily basis where you have to think about your own professionalism and think about, well, how am I going to react to this and how am I coming across? And in the same way, in the classroom, you're thinking about how you're building rapport with your students, how something you might have said might have been taken, and also dealing with, quite frankly, teenagers who are going through a difficult time in their life, and so they can be quite difficult to deal with as well. So it's really transferable in those sorts of ways. It's all fast paced.
Yeah, I'd say that's quite enlightening for me. I suppose my assumption, and obviously wrongly, was that they were very different worlds and in very different environments, and so therefore, I wondered which bits of the transferable skills would be there. It's almost a conversation would be so useful for students to know, because obviously I know
Yeah.
that myself. I don't know, you have this conversation with your students, that they're sort of scared about the A level choices they make, and thinking that's going to be the path for
Yeah.
them in regards to their career. And actually, you try and say to them, like you said about the transferable skills and the critical thinking, that actually,
Mm.
unless you're doing, I suppose, you want to be a doctor, some sort of medical degree, there's really, they're the only ones that you've got to have those set A levels. Everything
Yeah.
else, there is so much flexibility within that. And so, yeah, it was really useful to hear that, not just as a teacher, but obviously, I'm sure, for us to share with our students from yourself. In regards to what sort of adjustments then, like, did you have to make? Because obviously you're saying all those things are transferable. Is there anything that you think, without sort of, I don't know, evaluating sort of almost like the
Yeah.
paper one, the education system, but then I suppose the marketisation of education, where you're turning more into sort of an element of corporateness there,
Yeah.
even if that's a word. But is there anything you've had to adjust to, and be maybe a bit more patient with? I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think um, one of the key things I'd point out is the emotional impact that any individual student or group of students can have on you. And I genuinely mean that in a positive and a negative way. You could have one of the most amazing connections and exchanges with your students in one lesson that makes you feel really profound and like you've had a human experience, in a sociological way, I guess. But also, on the other hand, you can have quite a negative day, or you could have a negative exchange with a student or a member of staff, and you think, oh, that's really had an impact on my mood in the rest of my lessons, for example. So I think for me, just having to really gauge and get used to having such an emotional element to my job has been something I both welcomed, but also something to get used to. And I think, and maybe every teacher might say this at some point in their career, is genuinely when I swapped, it's, figuring out when you can use the toilet, because there are certain times of the day where you're told you are now, able to go and do the things that
Yeah. You're
you're supposed
teaching,
to
yeah.
do. Yeah, so, when you're not a teacher, and a teacher says that to you and you think, "What?" But it's not until you experience somebody telling you, "Well, you can't go now," that you're like, "Oh, okay. I have to figure this out."
No, I hear you. Like I remember more so my last job, because I had I had very short. We had very short lunch breaks, and it was like I'm either choosing to go to the toilet or go to have a drink, and I'm like I'm going to the toilet, like in a celebration. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's strange, I suppose. Yeah, those sort of things, like you know, things like going to the toilet, eating a drink, or not even able to eat in the classroom as well. Like obviously, I'd
Yeah.
imagine you're allowed to eat, but then some offices in London do have like no messy desk policies. I don't know what they're called, but clean desk policies. I think I'm not sure
Yeah.
where you're not allowed to eat. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we're not allowed to eat, yeah, but it's just, yeah, it's a change in respect of the emotional impact, the mental health impact, and the just, what your daily routine might look like.
yeah, and I think that really enlightening that you said about the emotional impact. I know that we've had a couple of guests on previously who've spoken about that. One's spoken about the imposter syndrome, or a couple have. We've had someone talk about positive psychology and coaching, how we can use that as
Mm,
teachers, and someone talk about well-being. And I think you highlighting as someone that's made that, because I think sometimes it becomes our normal when we're in.
yeah,
We say we've gone, degree into teaching and that's our life, it becomes our new normal. But for people that have come out from a different industry, have gone, do you know what, that's not, you've got to protect your well-being, that there's sort
yeah.
of that resource, that container that you keep on taking out, actually that's not helpful either. And actually it's important to note that, and protect that emotion. Like you said, it's a lot of it is emotional exchanges, and like you've
Mm.
said, something you can welcome, but also they can be ultimate highs one day and ultimate lows the next, and then it can have an impact. So, just out of interest, is that, how do you sort of protect yourself around that, like using maybe your previous experience from your other career, or what strategies have you used in order to sort of maintain that?
Yeah, I try to tackle it in the same way that I will tell my students, certain things. So, for example, the ways that we tell our students, don't worry about it. We've had this chat now. If something's gone wrong in your lesson, for example, or you've had a disagreement with a student, you have a chat with them and you say, next lesson is a fresh start.
Mm,
And I try to take every day or every lesson, if I
mm,
can, at push, I try to take every day as okay, I had a difficult time with that class on that day.
mm,
It's a new day. Let me start again with this class, or what can I do differently? And it's that fresh slate is really helpful for me, and it hopefully is helpful for other teachers, so that you don't start building grudges against, certain classes or certain individuals. And it really just helps you to have a fresher mind, I think, a
mm.
fresher mood.
Oh, definitely. That's really like useful advice, sort of that sort of reflective practice and those sort of fresh starts. I think is such a really simple rule to have. Every day is a fresh day, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And like we've had previous guests talk about it, but there's sort of that crisis at the moment with the teaching profession, where the people are leaving. I had some training myself the other day in my own job that was advising us that it's a point where we haven't got many people recruiting in, but then we're also
Mm.
losing people on the other end. So there's the people that are leaving, but there's no one coming in on the other ends. And actually,
Yeah.
it can't be underestimated how important well-being is, and looking after that, and getting people switching careers into teaching as well that've got wealth experience like yourself. So my sort of question is, if there are anyone out there that's listening,
Yeah.
or people that are just embarking on this start of this transition from a different career, whether that's maybe in the corporate world, or something that's similar to teaching but isn't teaching, what sort of advice would you give them if they're thinking about embarking on this journey?
So, one of my key pieces of advice would be to have confidence in your skills that you've already built up in your separate career. I think inevitably, in some sort of way, shape, or form, they will be transferable. And you'll be surprised at how helpful they are in that situation. Or when you're given time to reflect about it afterwards, you'll realize, oh, actually, I dealt with that way better than I would have if I didn't have my previous career. And as you were talking about imposter syndrome, it massively helps with, constantly having to bat away that imposter syndrome, to just have that confidence in yourself to know, well, I've done a previous career, I should be able to do this one as well. Um, so that's a key bit of advice I would give. Another piece of advice I would say, I'll just give two more, and that's allow your passion for your subject to come through in your lessons, because it's such a beautiful thing to both receive and also to give that. And I just think your students will see it when you're passionate about your subject. They will feel it, they will see it, and they will enjoy the subject more because of it. And lastly, I would say that to every person who's changing into teaching or a different career, you're going to be on a learning curve because you're starting something new, and that is totally okay. So just take it in your stride.
Oh my gosh, amazing advice. I must admit, I think that's why I've got you on twice. Like, I literally can sense your passion. It's not something that's after, I mean, obviously you've spoken to lots of guests and they have as well, but you can really feel it, even like, obviously we're doing this across the screen virtually, but I think, oh my gosh, I'd love to be taught in your lessons, because you can
Thank
really
you.
see that. And I do, and I totally agree with you. I think, I know I've spoken about it before. Yes, and I know that Duncan was talking to me about not being the expert and the facilitator of learning. He's like, well, yeah, we are. To a point, I think, yes, we are. Of course, if we didn't have our knowledge, then we can't navigate the conversation in the
Yeah.
right way. But I think for me, that teacher-student relationship, that sort of in the sort of professional, um, sort of be able to sort of share your love for the subject is so
Mm.
important. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you can't transfer that
Yeah.
and bring students along that journey, then ultimately that doesn't work. I think that's so, and I can really sense that off you, how much you've enjoyed it. So I'm so grateful that you're an extra addition to the profession, and that
Thank
you
you.
chose to make that transition, and onwards and upwards. I mean, yeah, I'd love to hear about your sort of how it carries on, your journey goes, and yeah, thank you for your time, and thank you for coming on again. I really, really appreciate your time.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Take care and have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.